1824, Georgia. A master who controlled everything, a wife who said nothing, and a slave who wouldn't submit. Then one night, the doors locked, the house went silent, and inside that room, the master didn't stop it. He watched. Weeks passed. Whispers spread until the unthinkable happened. His wife was pregnant, but the real horror wasn't the child. It was the man who allowed it. 1824, Georgia. The house stood alone, surrounded by silence. No laughter, no music, just whispers that never left the walls. They said the master owned everything. Land, money, people. Nothing moved without his permission. But inside that house, something was wrong. His wife, she stopped smiling first, then speaking, then looking people in the eye. Servants noticed, but no one dared ask, because the master, he was always watching. Every step, every breath, every mistake. And then there was him, the slave who didn't act like the others, didn't beg, didn't break, didn't bow his head the way he was supposed to. That alone was dangerous, very dangerous. At first, the master said nothing. He just observed, quiet,
patient,
like a man waiting for something. Then one night, everything changed. The lamps were dimmed. The servants were dismissed early. Doors locked from the inside. And the entire house fell into a silence, so heavy. It felt like a warning. No one saw what happened in that room, but they heard something. Not screams, not cries. Something worse. Silence, where there should have been resistance. And footsteps, slow, deliberate, back and forth, as if someone was watching, waiting, enjoying. By morning, nothing looked different. The master sat at the table, calm, composed. His wife didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't even look up. And the slave, he stood there, unshaken, unreadable, like nothing had happened. But something had. Something that would rot that house from the inside out. Because from that night on, the rules changed, not broken, rewritten, and no one was ready for what came next. Morning came, but the house didn't wake. It just existed, heavy, like something unseen was sitting on its chest. The plantation stretched for miles, fields of cotton, moving like ghosts in the wind. Dozens of workers, heads down, hands bleeding, no voices, only orders. Sharp, cold, final, because this land belonged to one man, the master. A man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Fear did the talking for him. They said he was different, not cruel in the way others were. No whips in public, no rage in the open. That would have been easier to understand. No, his cruelty was quieter, controlled, precise, like a man who enjoyed watching things unfold. Slowly, very slowly. Inside the house, nothing felt human. The walls were too clean, the floors too silent. Even the air felt watched. Servants moved carefully, eyes low, steps softer than breath. Because one mistake, one glance too long, could cost everything. And then there was her, the wife. She used to walk the halls, soft footsteps, soft voice, a ghost of kindness, in a place that had none. But now, she stayed in her room, curtains drawn, door barely open, food left untouched. Days passed, and she said nothing, not a word, not a sound, like she was fading, while still alive. And people noticed. Of course they did. But noticing was dangerous, so they whispered, in corners, in shadows. Quick! Nervous. Something happened that night, but no one knew what. No one. Except three people. The master, the wife, and him, the one who didn't bow. He worked the fields like the others, but he wasn't like them. Didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't look afraid. Even under the sun, even under the weight, he moved like a man who had already faced something worse. And that made people uneasy, very uneasy, because on this land, fear kept you alive. And he had none, or at least none that anyone could see. The master noticed that. Of course he did. From the balcony, from the windows, from the shadows behind curtains, he watched him. Every movement, every pause, every moment that didn't fit the rules. And slowly, something began to form. Not anger, not punishment, something colder, a plan. Because that night, that locked room, was not an accident. It was the beginning, and whatever the master had started, he wasn't finished yet, not even close. The sun rose again, same land, same fields, same silence. But nothing felt the same anymore, because now there was tension in the air, invisible, constant, like a rope tightening, without anyone pulling it. And in the middle of it all, he worked, the slave, no name spoken aloud, no title given, just another body in the field. At least that's what it looked like, but he wasn't like the others. Others bent quickly, spoke softly, avoided eyes. They learned fear early and carried it forever. But him, he moved differently, slow, controlled, unrushed, as if time didn't own him. And that alone was dangerous, very dangerous, because on this plantation, even silence had rules, and he never followed them fully. People noticed small things, how he didn't flinch at the overseer's voice, how he didn't rush when others panicked, how his eyes never lowered fast enough. Not defiance, not rebellion, something else, something deeper, like he was observing everything, even the people watching him. And that made rumors grow. Fast. He thinks he's above us. No, he's just waiting. For what? No one knew. But the master knew one thing for sure. That man was not ordinary, because ordinary men survive by disappearing. But this one, he was being seen, on purpose, and that made the master curious. Curious and patient, which was worse. Inside the big house, the wife remained locked away. Days blurred into each other. No visitors, no sound, just silence thick enough to feel like punishment. And yet, she was still there, alive, breathing, changing. Something in her had shifted since that night. Something no one spoke about, because speaking about it would make it real. And no one wanted that. Not the servants, not the house, not even the master. At least not yet. But he watched her too, from afar, from behind doors, from moments she didn't know she was being seen. And in those moments, he was not calm anymore, because control was starting to slip. And the slave, he was still there, still working, still silent, still unbroken. But something was coming closer, something neither of them could stop anymore. Because in a house built on control, the smallest crack becomes a collapse. And that night, another door would open, one that should have stayed closed forever. The house didn't change. It still looked the same. Same walls, same doors, same quiet halls. But something inside it had shifted. And at the center of it was her, the wife. She used to move like light, soft steps, soft voice, a presence that didn't belong in a place built on control. Sometimes she would pause near the servants, not speaking, just looking, as if she remembered what kindness felt like. But that version of her was gone now. She stayed behind closed doors, curtains drawn tight. No sunlight, no fresh air, just shadows. Days passed, and no one heard her voice, not once. Food trays were left outside, sometimes untouched, sometimes barely disturbed, like someone eating only to survive, not to live. And the servants noticed something else, something small but terrifying. The master stopped forcing her out. He didn't call for her, didn't question her silence, didn't demand she appear beside him like before. Instead, he allowed it, encouraged it, protected it, like her isolation was part of something bigger, something planned. And then there were the nights, late, when the house should have been asleep, but it wasn't, because sometimes a door would open, soft, careful, almost rehearsed. Footsteps followed, measured, unhurried, not hiding, not afraid, just controlled. And always those footsteps led to the same place, her room. No one saw who entered. No one dared to check, because knowing would mean choosing a side. And on this plantation, there were no safe sides, only survival. But one servant listened, from down the hall, hidden in darkness, holding her breath, like it might betray her. She expected sounds, voices, struggle, something human, but what she heard instead was worse. Silence. Long, unbroken, unnatural silence, as if whatever was happening inside didn't need words, didn't need force, didn't need permission. And then, footsteps again, leaving the room. Same pace, same calm, like nothing had happened, like everything had happened, exactly as intended. By morning, the house returned to its lifeless routine. The master at the table, cold, still, watching. The wife, hidden away, more distant than before. And the slave, still working the fields, still silent, still unchanged on the surface. But something connected them now. Something invisible, something no one could name. But everyone could feel, because this was no longer about control alone. It was something deeper, darker, more deliberate. And whatever the master had started, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't madness. It was design, a slow, careful, terrifying design. And now, all three of them were inside it, whether they wanted to be or not. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to understand, easier to resist. No, it happened slowly, so slowly. No one could point to the exact moment. Things became wrong. The master began with small changes, almost invisible, orders that didn't sound like orders, requests that felt like commands. Certain servants were reassigned, moved away from the main house. Others were told not to return after sunset. No need, he said calmly. The house will manage. But the house was not managing. It was tightening, closing in on itself, room by room, door by door, until only a few spaces remained alive. The dining hall, the master's study, and her room, always her room. Then came the rule no one questioned out loud. No one was to walk the east corridor at night, not for cleaning, not for water, not for anything. If something was needed, it could wait until morning, because after dark, that part of the house belonged to him. And whatever he was doing, it required silence, perfect silence. The servants obeyed. Of course they did, but obedience didn't stop fear. It fed it, because when rules appear without reason, it means something worse is hiding behind them. And then he gave the order no one expected. The slave, the one who didn't bow, was no longer assigned to the fields after sunset. Instead, he was to remain close to the house, always available, always present. No explanation given, no reason offered, just a quiet instruction, delivered with a look that allowed no questions. The others noticed immediately. Of course they did. Men like him didn't get moved closer to the master. They got punished, broken, removed, but not him. He was being positioned, and that made the fear worse, because punishment had rules. This didn't. At night, when the sky turned black and the fields disappeared, he would stand near the edge of the house, waiting, still, like he knew something was coming. And inside, the master moved differently now, less visible, more present, like a shadow that had learned how to think. He spent longer hours in the East Wing, longer nights, awake, watching, listening, measuring something no one else could see. And the wife, she changed again, not louder, not stronger, no, quieter, but not empty anymore. There was something behind her silence now, something alive, something forming. When she did step into the hallway, rare, unexpected, the servants froze, because her eyes were no longer distant. They were focused, not on people, but through them, as if she was looking at something far beyond the walls, or something already decided. And one night, the pattern broke. The master didn't wait. He didn't send for anyone. He opened the door himself, walked down the corridor, stopped, right in front of him. The slave, for a moment, nothing moved, no words, no orders, just two men standing in silence that felt heavier than anything spoken. Then the master stepped aside, just slightly, not enough to seem polite, enough to make it clear. This was not a request. It was permission, or maybe an invitation. The slave didn't hesitate, didn't ask, didn't look away. He walked past him, straight down the corridor, toward the one door. Everyone feared her door, and behind him, the master followed, not stopping him, not guiding him, just watching. The door closed, softly, like always, and once again, the house fell into silence. But this time, it felt different, heavier, final, like something had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, because this was no longer strange behavior, no longer quiet control. This was something else now, something deliberate, something chosen, and whatever was happening inside that room, it was no longer hidden by accident. It was being allowed by the one man who controlled everything. By now, no one pretended anymore, not in their thoughts, not in their silence. Something was happening in that house, something no one dared to name, but everyone understood, because patterns don't lie, and this pattern was too precise, too controlled, too intentional. The nights became routine, the same door, the same corridor, the same quiet footsteps that never rushed, never hesitated, never turned back. The slave would be called, not by name, by presence, a look, a pause, a signal only he seemed to understand. And each time, he followed, not like a man forced, not like a man afraid, but like someone who had already accepted that resistance was no longer part of this world. Inside the room, no one saw, no one entered, but outside, the silence told its own story. Long stretches of nothing, then movement, then stillness again, like something was being repeated, refined, perfected. And the master, he was always there, sometimes inside, sometimes just beyond the door, but never far, never unaware, because this wasn't chaos. This wasn't loss of control. This was design, a slow, careful, calculated design. And the truth, the real truth, was worse than anything the servants imagined, because the master was not being betrayed. He was not being deceived. He was not a victim. He had chosen this, every moment, every night, every step of it, not out of weakness, not out of madness, but out of something colder, something deeper, obsession, not with love, not with power alone, but with legacy, because there was one thing the master did not have, one thing he could not control, an heir. Years had passed, and the house remained empty of children. Whispers had followed them for a long time, quiet at first, then louder, crueler. A man with everything, except a future, and men like him, they do not accept limits, they erase them. So he began to watch, to study, to notice the one man who didn't break under pressure, the one man who carried something different. Strength that didn't come from fear, endurance that didn't come from obedience. And slowly, a thought formed, unthinkable to others, but not to him, because in his world, people were not people. They were tools, and if a tool could do what he could not, then it would be used, carefully, secretly, completely. And the wife, she wasn't asked. She wasn't freed. She was placed inside the same design, a silent center of a plan she never chose, but could no longer escape. That's why she changed. That's why her silence felt different, because it wasn't emptiness anymore. It was awareness. She knew. Maybe not at first, maybe not fully, but enough to understand that the nights were not accidents, not mistakes, not moments of weakness. They were part of something that had already been decided for her, and for him, and for the child that did not yet exist, but was already being planned. And that's what made it terrifying. Not the secrecy, not the silence, but the intention behind it. Because once something is done by accident, it can be denied. But when it is done on purpose, again, and again, and again, it becomes something else entirely. Something final, something irreversible. And now, there was no turning back, because the plan was already working, even if no one had said it yet, even if no one had seen the proof. It was coming, slowly, quietly, inevitably, and when it arrived, everything would change, not just inside that room, not just inside that house, but across the entire plantation. Because some secrets don't stay buried, they spread. And this one was already beginning to grow. It started small, so small, it could have been ignored. A missed meal, a longer rest, a hand placed, just slightly lower than before. At first, no one said anything, because on that plantation, seeing was dangerous. But time doesn't stay silent, and neither does the body. Weeks passed, then more, and slowly the change became impossible to deny. The wife was no longer just quiet. She was different. Her movements slowed, her posture shifted, her presence heavier, not with fear, with something else, something growing. And the servants, they knew before anyone spoke it aloud, because they had seen it before, in others, in hidden corners of the land, in stories that were never written down. They recognized the signs, even if they refused to say the word. But whispers don't need permission. They spread anyway. She's changing. She's not sick. Then what is it? Silence. Because the answer was too dangerous to say. Until one morning, it happened. She stepped out of her room, not by accident, not briefly, fully, for the first time in weeks. And everyone saw it. There was no hiding it anymore. No shadows deep enough. No silence strong enough. The truth stood there. In plain sight, she was carrying a child. The house didn't react loudly. No shouting. No chaos. Just stillness. A heavy, suffocating stillness, like the walls themselves were trying to process what they were seeing. Because this wasn't just a pregnancy. This was a question. A dangerous one. Whose child was it? The servants lowered their eyes, not out of respect, out of survival, because the answer was already forming in their minds, and thinking it was risk enough. But the master, he didn't react the way they expected. No anger, no denial, no sudden violence, to silence the truth before it spread. Instead, he watched her, closely, carefully, like a man examining something he had been waiting for, something he had planned, down to the smallest detail. And then he smiled. Not wide, not proud, just slight, controlled, but real. And that smile terrified everyone who saw it, because it meant one thing. He already knew. There was no question in his mind, no doubt, no confusion. This wasn't a surprise to him. This was confirmation. The plan had worked. From that day forward, everything changed. The wife was no longer hidden. She was protected, watched even more closely than before. Her meals returned. Her door remained open longer. But not for freedom, for observation. And the slave, he was no longer just present. He was essential, moved even closer, given fewer tasks, watched differently now. Not as property, not as labor, but as something else, something dangerous, something valuable. Because whether anyone said it or not, the truth was already alive, growing, breathing, becoming impossible to erase. And the plantation felt it, in every corner, in every whisper, in every silence that followed a question no one dared to finish. Because once that child was born, there would be no more hiding, no more pretending, no more control over the story, only consequences. And consequences were coming fast. Once the truth took shape, it didn't stay still. It moved, through glances, through silence, through the way people avoided each other's eyes. Because everyone knew, but no one could say it. And that's what made it dangerous. Because unspoken truths don't disappear. They grow louder in the dark. The plantation changed, not on the surface. The fields still moved. The work still continued. Orders were still given and followed. But underneath, everything was unstable, like the ground itself was waiting to split open. The servants began choosing distance. No one lingered near the house anymore. No one stood in the corridors longer than needed. Even the air around the east wing felt avoided, because something unnatural was unfolding there, and people could feel it, even if they didn't understand it. But fear doesn't stay contained forever. Eventually, it turns into something else, resentment. And resentment needs a target. It found one. Him, the slave, the one who had been moved closer, the one who walked freely at night, the one who entered the room. No one else was allowed to approach. He became the center of it all, not because people knew the truth, but because they needed someone to blame. Eyes followed him now, not with curiosity, with something sharper, colder, dangerous. Whispers grew heavier. He's the reason. He brought this. This isn't natural. But even those whispers never rose above a breath, because blaming him openly would mean questioning the master, and no one survived that. Except one man decided to try, not loudly, not recklessly, but quietly, carefully, like everything else in that house. He was older, longer in the fields than most, a man who had learned how to stay invisible, but something in him had reached its limit. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was anger, or maybe it was the realization that whatever was coming would not spare anyone. So one night, he moved, slow, silent, keeping to the shadows, the way he had done his entire life, down the forbidden corridor, closer and closer, toward the door no one was supposed to approach. The house felt different that night, tighter, like it was watching him, waiting. But he kept going, because once a man decides to cross a line, he doesn't stop halfway. He reached the door, paused, listened. Nothing, no voices, no movement, just that same unnatural silence. His hand lifted, slowly, shaking, not from weakness, from knowing that whatever was behind that door would change everything, forever. He pushed it open, just enough to see, and in that moment, the truth stopped being a whisper. It became real. His breath caught, his body froze, because what he saw inside wasn't confusion, wasn't chaos, wasn't something out of control. It was calm, organized, intentional. The master, watching, exactly as before, not disturbed, not conflicted, present, fully aware. And the realization hit harder than anything else could have. This wasn't something that had gone wrong. This was something that had been built this way, on purpose. The man stepped back, slowly, silently. But it was too late, because once you see the truth, you carry it, and truth has weight. It changes how you walk, how you breathe, how you look at everything around you. He tried to return to normal, to disappear again, but he couldn't, because now he knew, and knowing is the most dangerous thing on that land. By morning, something was off, not visible, not obvious, but present, like the calm before something breaks. The master noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. Small changes, shifted patterns, the things others missed. And this he did not miss, because control was slipping. Not completely, not yet, but enough to force a decision. Because secrets can survive silence, but they cannot survive witnesses. And now there was one. The question was no longer whether the truth would come out, but what would be done to stop it. And someone was about to disappear. Morning didn't feel like morning. It felt delayed, like the sun had risen, out of obligation, not certainty. The plantation moved as it always did. Hands in the fields, heads lowered, work continuing. But something underneath it all had shifted, because one man now carried the truth. And truth doesn't stay quiet inside a human body. It leaks, in small ways, in glances that last too long, in hesitation where there used to be none, in silence that feels different. He tried to hide it. The older man tried to return to routine, to become invisible again. But once you've seen something you were never meant to see, you don't move the same anymore. And the master noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed, not the obvious, the subtle, the shift in rhythm, the break in pattern. And this man, he had changed. Just enough, just slightly, but enough to become a problem. And problems do not survive in a house like this. The call came quietly. No shouting, no public punishment, no display. Just a message passed through another. The master wants to see you. Those words alone were enough. The man froze for a moment, because he understood. Not fully, but enough. Still, he went, because there was no choice in it. There never was. Inside the house, everything felt tighter, smaller, like the walls had moved closer together. He was led to the study, a room few entered, a room fewer left unchanged. The door closed behind him, softly, always softly. The master stood near the window, back turned, hands folded behind him, calm, still, watching something outside, or nothing at all. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, "Did you sleep well?" The question landed gently, too gently. The man didn't answer right away, because it wasn't a real question. It was a test, a pause, a space, waiting to be filled with the wrong move. "I did, sir," he said finally, quiet, controlled. The master nodded slightly, still not turning around. Silence again. Then, "You've been walking differently." Not an accusation, an observation. That was worse, because observations don't need proof. They don't ask questions. They confirm answers. The man's throat tightened, his hands stilled. Every instinct told him one thing: deny, disappear, say nothing. But the problem with truth is, once it lives inside you, it changes your fear, and fear changes your choices. "I saw something," he said. The words escaped before he could stop them. The room didn't react. The master didn't move, didn't turn, didn't speak. But the silence that followed shifted, became heavier, sharper, final. "What did you see?" Still calm, still controlled, but now focused. The man swallowed. This was the line, the one you never cross, the one that separates survival from consequence, and he had already stepped over it. So he finished what he started. Everything. That word did something, not loud, not visible, but real. The master finally turned, slowly, measured. His face was the same as always. No anger, no shock, no panic, just certainty. Because now there was no doubt. This man knew, and knowledge like that could not exist freely. Not here, not in this house, not in this carefully built design. They stood there, looking at each other, one holding the truth, the other holding control. And in that moment, the outcome was already decided, because control always protects itself, no matter the cost. The master stepped closer, not fast, not threatening, just close enough to remove distance, to remove options. "You shouldn't have looked," he said quietly. Not angry, just factual. And that was the last real moment. The man existed as he was, because after that, there were no witnesses, no voices, no record of what happened next, only absence. By the next morning, he was gone. No explanation, no mention, no questions asked, because questions were more dangerous than answers. And just like that, the truth had been contained again, or so it seemed, because removing a witness doesn't remove what was seen. It only delays what comes next. And now, the house was quieter than ever, but beneath that silence, something was building, something inevitable, because the child was still coming. And when it arrived, no one would be able to control what it meant anymore. After that, the house became perfect again. Too perfect. No whispers, no mistakes, no one stepping where they shouldn't. The kind of silence that only exists after something has been erased. The man who had seen too much, gone. No trace, no memory allowed. And just like that, control returned, or at least it looked like it had. Because inside the house, everything continued. The master still watched, still measured, still moved through his world, like nothing had ever slipped. The wife, she carried the child openly now. No more hiding, no more shadows, but she wasn't free. She was guarded, observed, protected, like something valuable, not someone. And the slave, he remained close, always near, no longer just part of the house, but part of its center, a living piece of a plan that was nearing completion. Time passed, slow, heavy, inevitable, until one night it happened, not loudly, not chaotically, but completely. The child was born, behind closed doors, with only a few present. And when the first cry finally broke the silence, it echoed through the house, like something unnatural, not because of the sound, but because of what it meant. The servants heard it, every one of them. And in that moment, no one needed to ask anything anymore. Because the truth was no longer hidden. It was alive, breathing, impossible to deny. Morning came, and for the first time, the master did something different. He carried the child himself out into the light, not to show pride, not to celebrate, but to confirm something to himself, to the house, to anyone who dared to look. The child was real. The plan had worked. His legacy now existed. But something else existed too, something he hadn't calculated. Because control can build outcomes, but it cannot control what those outcomes become. As the days passed, the house began to feel different again. Not tense, not afraid, but unstable. Like something invisible had entered the foundation. The master noticed it first. Of course he did. But this time, there was no clear cause, no single person to remove, no mistake to correct. Because the problem was no longer external. It was inside the result itself. The child grew, day by day, and with it, the truth grew louder, in the way people looked, in the way they avoided looking, in the way silence returned, but heavier than before. Because now, the question was no longer what happened. It was what it meant. And meaning is something control cannot erase. The master became restless, watching more, sleeping less. His perfect design no longer felt perfect, because it had created something he could not fully own. Not in the way he expected, not in the way he needed. And slowly, that realization began to break him. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but internally, quietly, like everything else in that house. Because for the first time, he had created something that carried truth, not just control. And truth doesn't obey. Months later, the story changed again. Not in the house, but beyond it. Because secrets like this don't stay contained forever. They leak through servants who leave, through whispers that travel, through time itself. And eventually, the plantation was no longer known for its order or its silence, but for something else. A story, one that no one told directly. But everyone had heard of a master who controlled everything except the truth he created, of a house where silence was louder than screams, and of a child who carried a legacy no one could fully claim. As for the master, he didn't fall in one moment. There was no dramatic end, no public collapse, just a slow fading, a quiet unraveling, because once control cracks, even slightly, it never returns the same. And the house, it stood, long after, empty, silent, but never clean of what happened inside it. Because some stories don't end. They linger in places, in memory, in silence, waiting for someone to ask what really happened there. And the answer is never as simple as it should be.